Imagine if there were voices in your head constantly listening. Imagine if you were seeing strange people and strange objects that other people could not see. Imagine if you needed help to get rid of all these strange things happening to you, and it simply isn't possible due to social stigma, financial barriers, and a lack of resources. This is the scenario for many sufferers of psychiatric disorders in New Zealand today. New Zealand has a population of about 4.43 million. Now, of that population, there are about 225,000 diabetic sufferers who receive ongoing care and medication and a lot of support from family, friends, and doctors. Then we have about 886,000 mental illness sufferers who can only receive care if they can afford it and receive a lot of stigma from the public and very little consideration. Today, I am here to explain why psychiatric disorders in New Zealand needs to be handled a lot better. The factors that I'll be discussing that affect the way we handle these disorders are a lack of education, the inadequate funding in New Zealand, and of course, the fact that all the psychiatrists in New Zealand are going overseas, leaving us with nothing. But before I start, let's go through what a psychiatric disorder actually is, which is essentially a syndrome that is usually characterized by a significant disturbance in our cognition or emotional regulation, and usually reflects a dysfunction in a psychological, biological, or developmental process. And usually a lot of us can associate that with significant stress in our daily lives. Now take a look at these photos. See the brain between a person with no disorder and a person with a disorder. Now, why am I showing you this? I'm showing you this because I want you guys to know that psychiatry is a science. But in New Zealand, many people don't consider this. Why? Well, it's a lack of education. People simply aren't well informed about the seriousness, the signs and the symptoms of these disorders. I took my own survey of about 70 people that I knew, and all I did was ask them if they could define and identify the symptoms of any of these disorders. And it shocked me to see that only 46% of them could do that, and the rest of them just gave me a blank stare. So, the thing is, social stigma about mental disorders can only be eradicated through education. And right now we have a very large lack of education, so we need to eradicate this. How? Educate the students. Take our target audience of Year 7 to Year 13 students and just teach them all the basic major illnesses and outline the symptoms. Of course, we can have regular speakers come to schools and talk to these students. And teachers need to reiterate the messages to the students, especially if you do have students in a school suffering from mental illness. But then, of course, we need to target the nation. That's where advertising comes in. Right now, our advert that just gives a website called depression.org.nz is not enough. What I suggest we could do is have a series of mental illness advertisements that outline the horrific symptoms of each illness. This is how we educate our public. So good, educating our public abolishes stigma. But then, how do we start treating our patients? We need funding, a lot of funding, but funding in the right places. In National's 2011 report about mental health, they said they'll put about $33 million into the mental health sector. But right now, all of that is going into drug and alcohol prevention. But what about the people suffering from bipolar disorder, or psychosis, or schizophrenia? Where are they going to get their funding? That's why I've decided two proposals that we could use the $33 million for. First, psychiatric facilities. And I mean proper institutions. We need at least one in the North and one in the South Island. They need to be equipped with the standard resources. And the good thing about these institutions is that they prevent the long waiting list for individual psychiatrists. Inpatient facilities are quicker and beneficial. But then, of course, psychiatric treatment costs a lot of money. So, we need subsidies. Subsidies, subsidies, subsidies. And of course, we can base this on income and decile area which the sufferer lives in. And the thing about subsidies is that we need to ensure that no Kiwi in New Zealand uses financial barriers as a reason not to get help for their disorder. So great, we have our institutions, we have our educated public. Where have all our psychiatrists gone to? Most of the graduates of psychiatry end up leaving to places like Australia and the UK. And because of this, we have a large shortage, a very alarming shortage of psychiatrists in New Zealand. We only have 600 trained psychiatrists. And remember, I said before, we have over 800,000 sufferers. So how do we get our psychiatrists to stay in New Zealand? Well, promote jobs during university study, and of course New Zealand needs to show enthusiasm to help people suffering to get better. And then of course you have to educate the graduates that we do have an alarming problem, they need to stay here. So before my time runs out, I want to quickly run you through the social and economical benefits. Of course, like I've been saying, the social benefits of handling psychiatric disorders in New Zealand is just going to be reduced stigma, which means people who are suffering feel more confident to go and get help, especially if there are facilities and subsidies ready to help them. And of course, we like a positive economy. So if we have these psychiatric institutions, we're going to have people staying in New Zealand, which means jobs are going to be filled, the economy is going to make money because students are paying Kiwi taxes, not Aussie taxes. So I do hope you now have reached a clearer understanding about why psychiatry is so important in New Zealand. If we change the stigma, fund psychiatrists and encourage medical students to also consider psychiatry and stay in New Zealand will definitely feel a positive outcome. The sufferers who hear voices in their heads, purge food from their stomachs, harm themselves and suffer a raging battle within their minds will finally have hope.